Stop the pigeon! 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 Ow! Nab him, jab him, tab him, grab him! Stop that pigeon now!
You are listening to Pigeon Radio Australia, produced and presented by Ivan Fonti and hosted on the Podbean Podcast Network. Pigeon Radio Australia was originally taken off the air back in 2023 due to a serious family illness. After that, I made the decision to keep the program off the air for 3 years. During that time, unfavourable comments on social media and within the racing pigeon community were constantly putting the program down. Complaints about how it was produced, criticism from all directions. And during the rotavirus outbreak, I was even receiving violent threats through email and unbelievably in my own home mailbox. After a long break, I've now decided to bring Pigeon Radio Australia back. Not as a full-time broadcast, but as a monthly podcast. If the interest is overwhelming and the listenership grows strongly, I may consider extending it to fortnightly and possibly even weekly. The future of the program will depend entirely on the support and engagement from the pigeon community. I am currently seeking sponsorship from pigeon supply companies to help cover the costs of running a professional podcast platform and distributing the show across all major podcast formats. If your company is interested in sponsoring the program, please get in touch with me through the website or via social media. A special thanks must go to avian veterinarian Dr. Rob Marshall, who has been asking me for the past 3 years to bring the program back. With the recent outbreak of the H1N5 bird flu in Australia, and after discussions with Dr. Marshall, who will fully support and be part of the monthly podcast, we decided that now is the right time to return with a new, more focused version of Pigeon Radio Australia. I also want to make it clear that I am still a full member of 88.3 Southern FM and remain in good standing with the committee. They have asked me to bring Pigeon Radio Australia back to their airwaves, and I may consider this if the podcast proves viable and popular enough to return to Melbourne radio. And finally, I must stress that no one involved in producing Pigeon Radio Australia receives any payments whatsoever. Everything is done voluntarily. Any sponsorship we seek is solely to cover running costs. Website hosting, podcast distribution, and equipment updates needed to keep the program professional and up to standard. I hope once again enjoy listening to Pigeon Radio Australia wherever you are, across Australia or anywhere around the world. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch up again every month on all podcast platforms. My name is Ivan Fonti. This is Pigeon Radio Australia, hosted on the Podbean Podcast Network and available on all podcast platforms, supporting the pigeon community worldwide. You're listening to Pigeon Radio Australia, a radio podcast voice of the Australian pigeon racing community. Today we bring you a very important episode as Victoria remains on a high alert for bird flu. There's a lot of concern, a lot of confusion, and today we're going straight to the experts to clear it all up. Joining us is one of Australia's leading avian veterinarians, Dr. Rob Marshall, here to explain what this alert really means, how bird flu relates to racing pigeons, and what fanciers should be doing right now. We're also joined by WPF flyer and Federation Secretary Michael Portelli, who'll talk about how the Western Pigeon Federation is responding, what fanciers need to know, and how racing may or may not be affected. This is essential listening for every pigeon fancier across Australia. So let's get into it. How you going, Rob? And hello to Michael. How are you all?
Yeah, good, Ivan. How are you, Rob?
Good on you. Thanks for joining us. It's always good to have a good fancier to join in the conversation to make some sense of it, or some context to it. So Ivan and I talked about this avian flu outbreak in wild birds. It's avian flu H5N1, and it's quite a pathogenic virus. What that means is that if a bird or if an animal or bird gets it, it can die. And the mortality rate in animals is a bit confusing, but some people say 50% mortality rate. The problem here, Ivan, is that all of the information that we're getting is generic information, and it's very difficult to get precise information about what species of animal or bird are most affected and what the mortality rate of each species is. So the only reference that I could see relates to storks, and the sort of blurb that the press and scientists are exposing is that they say millions of birds have died in Europe from this disease. Is that what you're getting, that sort of rhetoric?
Well,
Ivan,
that's what's going around, and there's a lot of panic going around, and
Yeah, so and it would be panic if millions of birds are getting died. Obviously, millions of birds have died from it, but what we need to know is what those birds are. Are they poultry that has been culled, right? Is that included in the number? And been culled because because they had this virus identified in their other farm? Or is it millions of birds across all species, or significant species? We don't know what the breakdown is. So I tried to find this, and I may be looking at the wrong place, so I tried pretty hard. And I found a reference for storks, right? And they said that they've really a bad outbreak of stork death in Europe somewhere. I've forgotten where it was. And the number was 1,000. Now I thought, God, this must be an endangered stork, right? 1,000. I wonder what the population of this stork, or generically, what's the population in Europe? And then I found a reference: 400 to 450 storks migrate to Europe each year. So what we had is this statement, a wipeout of these storks, 1,000 birds died, without any reference to the numbers or percentage of birds that go through Europe. So I found that quite enlightening in terms of what sort of information are we getting. So we had the Australian government, each state put out sort of a bulletin of what each state was going to do and what their process is. Now, from that information that I've got from that sort of talk, I recognise that they're waiting to see what happens, right? So at this point of time, everything in terms of racing pigeons is as normal because there's no directive from any government agency of what to do other than to monitor these birds, not go near any sick birds, not pick up any sick birds and take it to a vet, wild birds, I mean, and that's focused on seabirds and those birds that are known to bring it from the Antarctica, which is where they believe it is coming from. So in Antarctica, what we had massive numbers of sea lions and massive numbers of, I think, of seals die off. Now, my understanding with this disease, and I'm no expert with it, but I'm just trying to make sense of it, because I can't, and I have listened to experts on the internet talk about it, but they're all talking about generic information, like historic, what the numbers of deaths are overseas, what the risks to humans are, and maybe we should start what the risk to humans is first. So the risk of humans, I looked up a reference in America. Since 2020 until now, I think there have been 200 cases of bird flu in humans, and of those, I think maybe 20% died. Right now, that and the large majority, and in fact probably all of those, were either people who were in close contact with the disease in the poultry industry or in the cattle industry, because dairy cows get this disease, you see. So it was limited to intense exposure to the virus. So what that means, and this is the nature of the problem, the disease is transmitted from animal to animal, and they don't is through the saliva and droppings and things like that. They say that it actually attaches to clothes and you can get infected that way as well. But the concentration of viruses you would be exposed to would be very high. So you'd have to have close contact with a dead bird, which is infectious for some time. But saying that, there's a risk to humans. So essentially, they're putting out the message, don't touch these sick birds, right? Now, let's go to my understanding of how do birds get it, right? So in the Antarctica, the seals aggregate in numbers. Like you've seen on TV where the penguins aggregating thousands, the sea lions are next to each other lying, and they're all lying close together. So obviously that would spread very quickly from animal to animal because they're very close contact. The other thing is that to understand, and I did hear one scientist talk about this, is that this is a disease. Mortality happens in birds that have got lowered immunity. So, and that's why when we get these migratory birds, they're under a lot of stress, and some birds, and we see this on the New South Wales coast, the shearwaters, which is the mutton bird, Ivan, you know how it migrates from King Island and Flinders Island, the Bass Strait, and comes up the east coast to New South Wales. Where I live on the beaches, each winter we see hundreds of dead birds there, right? Now they're not diseased, but they're just run out of steam, coming up, migrating up when it's cold and they have no food supply or not enough food reserves to see them coming up into these headwinds, you see. So you're going to get die-offs like this naturally, just for natural causes rather than disease. But those birds are most prone to this disease. That's what it's all about. So it's not a disease and the current. So what is the status of? What is the situation of this disease in Australia? As I said, it's what the scientists are saying. Let's wait and see, right? We have to wait and see what's going on. Now, if we get an area, if we say get in the poultry industry, because that's what the main concern is, jump into the poultry industry because it's a commercial thing. In the wild, there's nothing we can do about this in the wild, although some conservation groups want us to improve the resilience of the native birds, say in the Coorong, you know, that area, that wetlands in South Australia where all these birds go to. They're worried that the disease will get in there, and that's a congregation area where a lot of birds are in the breeding season, which is coming up. It's just like Lake Eyre, where all these thousands of pelicans are breeding and stuff like that. So these birds that are aggregating closely together are prone to problems and big die-off if the disease gets in them. Now, and that's what they found in Europe, where the swan is a high-risk bird and various stuff. What we don't know, and we don't have any information regarding this, is which, as I said before, which bird species is most susceptible to it, and why is it susceptible to it. Now, I've been looking up are these birds susceptible. We've just mentioned one, their lowered immune status because of migration. We've talked about the aggregation, the close contact of large colonies of these birds. But we don't know what the risk to other birds. And my view is that another bird to get this disease would have to come in close contact with a bird that's dying or infectious or sick with this disease, right? So that to me would mean the other animal that gets it are cats, right? So if you look at cats, they hunt animals, right? My view is this: is that if you've got a bird like a pigeon, who's a grain eater, seed eater, it's not going to come in contact with these sick seabirds, right? And racing pigeons. So, and also parrots, which are seed eaters won't come in contact. But when we have the breeding season, say with the white cockatoos, which aggregate, what they do is they flock together in massive flocks, and they might be at risk. But still, again, these birds would have at risk if the disease gets into that flock because of their close contact. But the thing is that my view is this, that seed-eating birds won't be impacted by this. And the experience overseas, Ivan, you mentioned, is that in Europe, pigeons don't have symptoms of the disease. They don't die from the disease, but they may spread it. Is that what you have learned from overseas information?
Well, that's what I've learned, and then spoken to other people overseas, and that's what they inform me. And pigeon racing didn't cease at all.
Yeah, and it shouldn't either, because and so if you got the disease in a poultry farm, they just isolate that farm, put a quarantine perimeter around it. It doesn't impact on other working farms, right? They're just monitoring them. It's like when we had the PMV, paramyxovirus in the poultry in Sydney, where they came in and killed all these birds and wanted to kill, and in that particular quarantine area, they'd kill all the parrots as well, the pet birds. So I think they've sort of learnt from that experience, which may not have been the most appropriate thing to do. But my view is that with pigeons, it's business as usual. There's little risk to the pigeons, little risk of the pigeons transmitting the disease to other birds, right? And to wait until we see what this disease does in poultry, and if it goes to poultry, well then then you get local areas sort of affected. But I think at the moment, just don't worry about anything. In terms of human risk, the risk is really, really low, and it's confined really to those industry workers in close contact with sick birds in the poultry and dairy cattle industry. But that said, just keep away from any sick birds. Don't pick them up or touch them as a precaution.
Mm-hmm. Can I ask a question, Rob, in regards to, I was under the impression that most viruses are species specific, so that, you look at PMV in pigeons and we get, tons of doves and other types of birds sitting around your loft eating. I've had doves eat the vomit that pigeons throw up when they've got rotavirus from outside, and I've never seen, and those same doves have got rings on them, because I put rings on some of them when I catch them. Those same doves don't seem to have any symptoms whatsoever to rotavirus, and you never see dead doves or hear people say, I picked up 3 dead doves in the backyard. And I always was under the impression that viruses are very species specific. I've never caught a virus from my pigeons in any way, shape or form. What I did find interesting a few years ago when COVID was sort of the big thing, and I don't know if you saw the segment on 60 Minutes where they interviewed a woman, I won't go into what race and all the rest of it, but they interviewed a woman who was a scientist and was involved in vaccines and things like that, and they were actually doing tests on what they were doing with birds. I'm not sure if they were injecting human DNA into the virus, into bird flu virus into human DNA, or vice versa. And when they were asked why they were doing it, the answer was that they were doing it to see that if one day bird flu could infect humans, they would have hopefully made a vaccine for it that could protect people. I couldn't quite understand why you would be playing around with something that can basically be pretty deadly and hard to control from birds. You can't control birds migrating here, there and everywhere. It was just interesting that, people are doing things like that. And are these viruses that are around now infecting birds and humans, possibly from something like that?
Yeah, well, probably not, but I think I can explain. I look at it a different way, right? So this this flu virus has been around for millions of years, right? And you've had a lot of different strains come through without any effects. So we've had bird flu throughout our poultry industry that's there, but it has such an impact on their health, right? And then this is a pathogenic one, and what that means is that it's passing through the wild population. What will happen? The wild population, as you know, will get immune to it, right? Because those birds, say 10%, even if 50% die from it, you got 50% that are immune from it, and they're the ones that breed on. So they're going to impart immunity to the young. So that's what happens with the wild doves and things. They are exposed to it. The other thing is wild doves is and wild pigeons, we think they're under stress, but I reckon under less stress than they're very hardy birds. They've been bred to survive for this, right? And they're genetically tough birds. And so that's what we're looking at. We're looking at really those, and I think that's why pigeons don't get it in the wild, right? Because they've been exposed to this virus for so long that their immune system has got very strong messages to it. And so that's how I think we can explain that. I agree with you, but the thing that I'm disappointed in is there's no clear information about which species are most susceptible to it, right? And which birds aren't. So that would be pretty helpful. And also, how does this bird, as you say, some birds aren't susceptible, are susceptible, some aren't. But how does it spread, and what's the impact of the natural life history? That means birds that breed in isolation, like parrots, they don't, like a rosella. The likelihood of a rosella getting this disease would be sort of minuscule because it's a solitary bird, doesn't breed in flocks and things like that. But what the authorities are coming up with, they're worried about endangered species. Well, what endangered species are they? Is it the orange-bellied parrot, right? What is the risk of that getting this disease? And so, unfortunately, how I see it is they're promoting angst amongst the population by having generic statements rather than explaining in detail what the disease is and what the real risk is.
Yeah.
And I think we need more information, and you can't get this information. You look up this bird flu thing, you can't get information other than this generic stuff. Keep away from the birds, take a photograph of it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Makes it hard for us too, as far as like pigeon owners, because unfortunately people see things like that on the news and they don't quite, like you say, if it's not being explained as to what birds, what species, how it's transmitted and everything, people with racing pigeons or pigeons in general, their neighbours see that and all of a sudden they're in panic mode. Gee, this guy's got, pigeons. We need to do something about it, and it's probably going to impact us in a manner as well.
Yeah, totally right. So, and that's what that's the important thing. The important thing is that, and I think that's incumbent on the government to be more responsible in terms of mental health. It's a mental health issue with humans if they're going to worry like that, and also interacting with other people. So cats can get it. So we've got a few, and then worried about the dairy cattle. But what is the risk? What is the risk? And so I think I would prefer that. And no one's clear. With all these talks, no one's clear about what's happening and why they're monitoring it. Well, that's okay. But what is the plan when they see an outbreak? What is the plan? Where's that information so we can get a broader perspective of what's going on?
Yeah.
All right.
So if there was if they, like at the moment we have some bodies where you can actually if you have pigeons dying in your loft or anything from whatever viruses, they can sort of come to the birds and see what they're dying of, whether it be rota or whether it be PMV. What's the likelihood of say a pigeon was carrying the flu virus but was asymptomatic to it, which they supposedly seem to be. What would happen in the case where could the government actually come in and say, well, you've got a bird that's indicating bird flu, carrying bird flu, even though you've got no deaths due to bird flu rather than something else, what would possibly happen in your backyard in that situation?
Well, we haven't got that information. That's the information we need. Not just across pigeons, but every species of bird, right?
Mm.
Well, what happens if you got ducks in your dam on a farm and one dies and it comes up? What happens there?
Yeah,
we haven't got that information, and that would be very helpful to understand what's going to happen. But that's not forthcoming, and it's not forthcoming because the risk of this spreading is very, very low, right?
Mm.
That's why. So they haven't come up with that because they don't really expect that this disease to spread through. For example, initially when it first came out, they said all backyard poultry keep it in enclosed, or the egg-laying poultry, the free-range poultry farms.
Yeah.
They said keep them in their enclosures, right, at the beginning, right, and they're not. You can't do that, because you get sick chickens.
Yeah.
Then they say to net the area, these free-range chickens, at what cost and at what risk. So that's all gone. That's all died down. All those recommendations at first have gone down because they recognise that the risk is so low, and they're waiting to see what's going to happen and then make a plan based on that. So the other thing is that pet bird owners are very worried about this, and they're worried that they shouldn't let their birds out of the house, right, to get sunlight. Right now, sunlight is key to the health of a pet bird and for every animal, for vitamin D. So they're restricting the vitamin D exposure of their pet birds, which impacts on their health dramatically over time. So it's pretty hard. I found it's very hard for me to explain to owners of pet birds. It's all right. You can put your bird out there, right? Just make sure that you sit with the bird in the sunshine. But the risk is minimal. It's like minuscule.
Yeah. Overseas, Rob, how long have they been sort of dealing with this kind of bird flu? Has it been sort of years?
5 years.
5 years, and in those 5 years, there's never really been any real. I think was there any stoppages where they've stopped pigeon racing altogether?
No, not at all. No.
Yeah, because that's a long time to be going and having those sort of threats around, and obviously they don't feel the risk. A greater risk to do that, because otherwise they would shut it down. Yeah,
so there's been a precedent overseas. It's spread from Europe to Asia, Africa, America, right? And you don't hear, it's in Asia, so you don't. The Thai, one loft races have been going on. No worries. So that's I think pigeon fanciers just not worry about anything, just business as usual. But be aware of the disease and listen to see what happens, but not to worry about it, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think probably we're our worst own enemies as well when we sort of hear things like that, people get on the social media train and...
Well, that's what's going on, Michael. That's what's going on. And you're aware of federations now calling meetings and having meetings, and they don't really know what's going on at all, and they're already calling meetings about it.
Well, and that's because calling meetings because they're trying to make sense of it, and unfortunately, I haven't been able to find anything that makes sense in terms of what information is provided by the state government. So it's pretty hard. But I think this podcast, something like this, is all you need. All they need to listen to, and then understand that the risk is minimal. And then there's been precedents overseas. And then racing has been normal. No problems with pigeons. No problems with pigeon fanciers. Humans owning them with the problem. So I think that's probably all they have to do either.
Well, I guess at the end of the day too, I mean, look, if pigeon racing is resumed over the years in Europe for the last 5 years, there's no reasons, and they haven't been stopped there. I mean, look, it can happen anywhere, any time, but as long as things like that haven't happened, just bringing it up on internets and things like the social media just probably adds to, making people aware of something that's not necessarily a panic mode thing, you know. So if the government wants to stop you, they'll stop you. End of story. So unless it happens, just leave it alone.
Yeah, totally right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
This is Pigeon Radio Australia on the Podbean Podcast Network, streaming everywhere you get your podcasts. Understanding the new strain of the pathogenic E. coli. Rob, can you explain what this new pathogenic E. coli strain is and how it differs from the common E. coli we've seen in pigeons before?
Yeah, so what we've seen over the last year or two is a new sort of problem that comes up where the birds, it's usually at the beginning of the race season, maybe 2 or 3 weeks in. It can happen after training starts, 4 weeks before the race season too. So it's related to stress, especially young birds. I think we underestimate the amount of not just physical stress, but mental stress on these birds on this training. And stress is not a bad thing, but we have to manage it. But what happens is, for example, when we put the birds in the basket for the first time in the race basket, I had this checker flighty hen, and I could see, and it had a lot of tosses in race baskets and stuff normally, but at the club I could see it sort of not very happy in there about having to go away. And so we don't recognise that these young birds, take some time to get used to this transportation and stuff. And it's during that initial stage of adjustment to the new environment of being carried around is when they are under most, when their immune system is most impaired. Now, what happens is that E. coli, as you know, Ivan, is an indication that the gut is not moving through quickly enough. It's not contamination problems. So you've got a few different sorts of disease. You've got diseases that occur because the birds pick at something which is contaminated. For example, if they're pre-lofting, they can go into the grass and pick in the grass and go deeper into the soil. And that's a common cause of contamination with these gas-forming bacteria, anaerobic sort of type things, which make birds really sick because they produce toxins and gas. The way you can work that one out, as I think I've shown you, Ivan, is to fill the crop for gas. Michael, do you feel that your birds put gas in the crop today?
Look, not really, Rob. Yeah. I just generally sort of look at them as I'm sort of pretty observant with them, and sort of when I see certain symptoms over the years, I've sort of learnt to look for the things when I know the lofts well and they're going well. There's certain symptoms, there's certain things the pigeons do in the loft, and they indicate to me that they're in very good health. And then I also look at them very closely when they're not very well and look at the symptoms they sort of show, during those periods where depending on whatever I've got. But over the years, you sort of get to learn what you think they might have. And things like that. So, but not necessarily something I'll do where I'll feel for gas in the crop. No.
That's right. Because you've got healthy birds. I'm looking at sick birds coming in all the time. So what I do is when a bird comes in, I actually kill the crop, and so that's the first indication. Obviously, look at the head and all that sort of obvious signs, but this is a subtle thing. And I fill the crop for gas. Now, when you have gas in the crop, that indicates that the gizzard is not working properly. And now that can be, and I'll get into the E. coli in a minute, Ivan, but I just want to explain the sort of mechanism of this. So, and also the practicality. So, obviously, when we get a sick bird, I've moved my loft this year and just got young birds, and I'm racing really badly at the moment because I'm having a bit of trouble trying to get my birds perfectly healthy. The thing is that when you develop your own strain of birds and you have a constant, and you don't bring birds in from other people, not saying that other people that have sick birds, it's just that their immune system has developed differently. But when I raced previously, I developed a family of birds that was very resistant to the particular diseases which were inherent in my loft. So I had rarely got any sickness. But this year with young birds and very late breds, I got them in November, and from a lot of different places, that it was quite a challenge to manage the diseases. And I did get an entry with this pathogenic E. coli. Now, I've seen it before at the clinic, but it's much easier for me to understand the disease if I see it in my lofts, right? Because I'm there every day, and then I can see the mechanisms and what's involved with it. So what happens is that you'll see, obviously, the birds just lose their energy, so they won't fly. So the first thing you'll see is that suddenly, over 2 or 3 days, the flock will stop flying, right, and not fly well at all, and just land anywhere. And then they lose their appetite for a day, which is a fever sort of thing. Then they get, and associated with this is a green dropping, more of a diarrhea dropping. That means like a porridgey type dropping, and often you can mistake it for a P&V with a very watery dropping, but it's not so watery. With P&V, you just get flooded. The floor is flooded with watery droppings. So you've got this, and then what you'll see that they'll recover. Most birds will recover after a few days of this as it passes through. But then you'll get a few birds which won't be able to fly at all, and one wing will drop. Now it will drop, but it's not salmonella, right? So, and then a bit later on, you'll get swelling of the joints as well. So, and the swelling of the joints looks just like salmonella, but it's not salmonella. It's this pathogenic E. coli, which behaves in the same way. It establishes itself in the gut, and then it gets in the bloodstream. It's a form of sepsis, and then localizes in the joint. Now, once it gets in the joint, it tends to stay there. Now, the bird will be bright and alert, but it won't be able to fly. And those birds, you can cure those, because I've been playing around. I had 2 in my loft like this. I cured them with injections, and they have got better. So what I know is that this sort of, not when they got swelling of the joint, but when they can't fly with the wing drop. So you can actually, the reason I use injections to see if they can get better with it, rather than cull them if you see them. So what that told me is that you can cure this disease, and those birds have raised all right as well. Now, this disease affects young birds and old birds, not just young birds. So it's not like rotavirus. It is a young bird and old bird disease, but obviously it spreads from bird to bird. Now, with pathogenic E. coli, these pathogenic E. coli are resistant bacteria. That means that, and I've sent that away, probably 15 different cases to double check if I'm looking at the same E. coli. Now, on the culture, when we do culture, you get I can see a particular culture colony, a typical colony, and it's very angry. And so I know that this is consistent across different flocks. Now, and it's resistant. That means if you give, say, and it's resistant to all medicines except streptomycin and enrofloxacin, which is a Bachelor type thing. So it's only susceptible to 2 drugs. It's resistant to sulfurs, doxy, Thailand, Travelox, and Loxol, all those sort of things. Every other bacteria antibiotic it's resistant to. So you can give sulfur ABS for it, sulfur trimethoprim, and the birds will get a partial response, but not a complete response. Now, I want to sort of explain why is this resistant, and because when we're trying to prevent this or to cure it, we need to understand what is the mechanism of this disease. Why is it resistant to antibiotics? And there's certain bacteria. Pseudomonas is one, and you've probably heard of that one. You get it in dogs' ear infections that doesn't clear up. In parrots, you get it in the throat, where the throat infection doesn't clear up. In pigeons, we've got the E. coli in the gut, and then the other one is Staphylococcus and Streptococcus, which is we've talked about in the throat of pigeons. You see, so they're the 4 that you can get resistant bacterial strains to. So what happens with these particular bacteria is that they, say for example, we've got this E. coli and establishes itself in the gut, in the intestines. It establishes itself there, and then these bacteria, they clump together and they form a big community or colony that produces a mucus or a slime type matrix or gel around this colony microscopically, and that gel provides nutrients to the bacteria to perpetuate their breeding, and also prevents antibiotics from penetrating the bacteria, because the antibiotics work by affecting the cell membrane or the outer lining of the bacteria and kill it that way, so it sort of explodes in a way. So what happens, you get this gel forming, it's called a biofilm, around these bacterial colonies, and you can't get the bacteria in there, you can't get the antibiotic in there to cure it. So what I was thinking is, how do we prevent this? And the way you prevent it is to prevent this biofilm from developing. And so I did some, and so I've been playing around with things like this. In human things, Legionnaire. Have you heard of that disease, Legionnaire disease, air conditioning? So when you get Legionnaire's disease in the air conditioning of hospitals and stuff, it's a big deal, right? Yeah. And so what they have to do, they have to actually decontaminate all the pipes and all the in that air conditioning unit or wherever it is, right? Mm. And what they use is because Legionnaires forms a biofilm just like these other bacteria, and it sticks to the pipe walls, right? And so it perpetuates. So you can put antibiotics or disinfectants in it. It won't kill this bacteria. It will only do it temporarily, then it'll come back again. So what they have to do, they have to break down this biofilm, and the only way they can do it with very concentrated levels of chlorine, right, to break down. Now, obviously, you can't use that in the body, right, because it's too erosive, right? So you can't use chlorine, but it's explaining the same system, explaining in a way how these biofilms work and what we have to do. Now, there are things that can break down this biofilm, and interesting enough, because garlic is one of them, right? So over the time, we've seen the traditional way of supplementing pigeons to improve their resistance to disease is putting garlic in a food or in the water, right? And so what's happened with these sort of old systems, which are obviously effective at some stage, otherwise people wouldn't continue using them, that can explain why garlic is effective at controlling these E. coli infections in the past. Now, what we need to do, so you have to actually crush the garlic, right? You can't just put a clove of garlic in there. You have to crush it to release these chemicals, these plants, they're called phytochemicals or plant chemicals released, which will then break down this biofilm around this bacteria. So when we get this infection, we give it with the antibiotics, but antibiotics is not enough because we're just giving the antibiotics for a period of time. We can't give it forever.
Too long,
so what we have to do then is to bring in the garlic as a means to control the formation of this biofilm, as a means to prevent recurrence whilst the birds get fully recovered. So that's the way we manage it.
Can I ask you a question regarding the garlic then? I mean, I do have garlic cloves in my water throughout my season. Admittedly, I don't crush it. I leave the cloves in there and it just permeates through the water and it gets quite strong and reeky. So, and the birds, and my stock birds never get anything, cankers or anything. They've built their own immunity to things like that. I very, very rarely bring pigeons in. I'm careful what comes in and out of the loft. But you quite often hear that, like with garlic, certain medications, people say you shouldn't have mixed garlic, have garlic in the water at the same time as medication. Is that necessarily true, or?
I think. Well, I don't know, but it may be that they've read something, because there's two chemicals in the garlic which break this biofilm down. But obviously, there's other phytochemicals there. My view is that it wouldn't impact the efficiency of that drug. That's my right? And it would actually, in these sort of cases, would actually help the efficiency of that drug by breaking that biofilm down. So,
would you necessarily have to, like, if you were in the situation where if I left garlic in my water continuously and sort of change it, obviously, as it sort of weakens in the water and things like that, if you had that E. coli strain and you medicate for it with medications and you gave them just the garlic cloves or crushed garlic in the water, would that eventually rectify the problem, or you would have
yes, no, it would.
And then put them on medication?
Yeah, so what you're doing is you have to you get the drug that the bacteria is sensitive to. You get that, you have to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, and you incorporate the crushed garlic, and you need to make it fresh daily, right? So you have to, the garlic mixture, right, is fresh daily. You can't. I wouldn't recommend we leave it there all the time, just in case there's bacteria on the garlic or stuff like that, right?
Okay.
And so we do it daily, but then we incorporate other things to. So the antibiotics will kill that bacteria, right? But you have to then allow the immune system of the bird to maintain the health of the gut. You see? So what's happening with the gut is the gut has got this mechanisms of preventing bacteria invading into the deeper surfaces of those cells, right? And you've got this mucus barrier there. So that what we need to do is we need to maintain a healthy mucus barrier, and that's where we bring the vitamins in, right? So if when you get inflammation associated with this E. coli, the mucus barrier gets very thickened, and then it's called hypersecretion, and then it acts as a barrier for the nutrients to get in. So you can't get the nutrients to get in. So what you have to do, you have to break that mucus down. And what I do is, if we got and you'll see this, if you got the droppings going a bit off, it's counterintuitive, but if you give Epsom salts, right, you're going to clean that heavy mucus out of the gut, right? So then you get healthy mucus replacing it, and you'll find that it's counterintuitive, but when you get the green droppings, you'll see if you get Epsom salts, you'll get a brown dropping after that, because you're getting rid of all that mucus, and then after that you can give the vitamins, which will then be absorbed. If you don't get rid of that mucus, you're not going to get the vitamins aren't going to do their job. So that's the trick to it. And as you know, it's as you're heading, looking at droppings, right? But so my question is, and you might have answered this: when it gets humid or raining, why does the dropping enlarge and go khaki?
Oh, well, humidity is the number one reason why we get a lot of the problems. But no, I couldn't answer that question for you.
Yeah, I don't either. I don't know either, but I think you're right. I think what it is, I think it is that the immune system has been challenged and not, and so when it's challenged, you get all these things happening in the body. Try to help that body retain the nutrients. But what happens when you get a large dropping? That indicates that the gut is not absorbing or digesting food, because you're getting waste products. When you get the perfect dropping, the small dropping without any waste or water in it, it means that the gut is absorbing everything perfectly and it's extremely healthy. And we know that because the bird is fit and healthy. So the dropping size is a really good indication of what is happening in the gut. And if you bring these things in, so if you bring garlic in, which will be helpful, if you give a little bit of Epsom salt just for one day, if you bring in citric acid to acidify the gut, so you're fine-tuning that the droppings before you get a chance for that gut to slow down too much to allow the E. coli to come in. So so that's the story there.
Here's a bit of a question for you. So in humans, they say, like, when you go to the toilet and whatever, do number 2. when you a lot of the waste product that's passed is actually good bacteria from the gut, and like the majority of it, people think it's waste product from what you eat. Apparently, a lot of it's due to the good bacteria in your stomach, or maybe the good bacteria being replaced by your stomach. I sort of when I watched something that actually was suggesting that's what happens, I was just wondering if could it be the fact that that's what happens because it's a way in which they regenerate their good bacteria.
Yeah, that's really good what you're saying and bringing this up. That's why it's so good for you having you on as a sort of devil's advocate and contextual referee, right? Because the key thing here is that the gut of a human is different from the gut of a pigeon. And the reason is this, right? Pigeons don't have a cecum. The gut of a pigeon is different from the gut of a chicken, which has cecum, which is like their large bowel, right, of a human. Yeah. Pigeons don't have a large bowel. They don't have a cecum, don't have a large bowel. Now, in humans, they have that large bowel, and that's where all of this fermentation goes, where all this productivity goes on, producing bacteria, vitamins, and all that sort of thing happens in the large bowel. It's a really important place for that's your healthy gut. Now, that's where you get that microbiome, the microbiome, yeah, which is a community of healthy bacteria, right? That happens in the large bowel. In the pigeon, that happens in the small intestine. They don't have the large bowel, right? So there's none of that fermentation in a pigeon, right? Doesn't happen. So everything happens in the small intestine, or in the intestine, the stomach, and the gizzard, and that's where we focus all of our things. That's why we can get, because that's where we get these small droppings, because there's no fermentation or change or gas forming bacteria in the gut of a pigeon at all. So we approach it a little bit different. We use prebiotics still, because the microbiome that we're concentrating on, which is a healthy bacteria, is in the small intestine.
They say it's responsible for most of your health as well. Yeah. It supplies your body with the different. It goes to the microbiome goes to all different parts of the body that need it at the time. That is the way it is with humans.
It's the same with birds, right? What the microbiome, it tells the body what's happening in the gut, which is survival. You have to eat. The gut is the central area with the brain, right? So the microbiome, any changes will say to the body, hey, look, this microbiome is out of balance. I have to do something, or the gut has to respond. So the gut responds by either producing more mucus, or producing acid, or bringing new enzymes from the pancreas, or the gizzard working harder. Do you mean? So it reacts in that way, because once you get once the intestinal lining is breached, then you get big problems of inflammation throughout the body. Yeah. So that's when you get. So the gut is the center of health for the pigeon, that's for sure. Yeah. You have a healthy gut, everything goes together. You won't get respiratory, you won't get anything. So that's
they say that in humans too. Like it's one of them. A healthy gut is actually responsible for health pretty much for the whole body. An unhealthy gut causes all sorts of ailments for thousands or millions of people.
That's totally right. It's totally right. And that's good. I'm glad you brought that up. It's great.
This is Pigeon Radio Australia, hosted on the Podbean Podcast Network and available on all podcast platforms, supporting the pigeon community worldwide. There's been a lot of stories and, I'll say stories, going around about KD.
KD, what's going around?
Yeah, like going around that it's just a pack of detergent and it doesn't do any good for your birds and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting thing, because KD I spend a lot of time developing, and it's quite a sophisticated product, and it's a centre for all of the programs that I recommend. The reason for that is it can be used as a tool to identify the health and fitness of your birds. It's really a helpful tool. Now, I think the notion of a detergent has come from the fact that I mentioned in an article that I've included surfactants in it. A surfactant. Now, a surfactant is and so in surfactants are used in detergents, you see, because they are soap and they help clean things, right? So, but there are 4 different types of this. One to a cationic. I just won't be a minute, okay? So there's cationic surfactants. Now that's 95% of the surfactants are used in KD powder, cationic surfactants, and 10% are anionic, or the one that produces detergent. Now, in the early stages, I was trialing the KD and working out to get the right balance. So with the cationic detergents, they have antimicrobial effects. So that's why I included that in. So, and then I wanted a small amount of detergent because the surfactants, natural surfactants, are in the gut of a pigeon. It's produced in bile acids. Have you heard of bile acids in the liver?
Yeah.
So the bile acid is actually a surfactant. It's what it does. It's got one end is fat soluble, the other is water soluble, and it's key to digesting fat. But not to digesting fat, but to digesting fat as quickly as possible. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to incorporate a bit of a detergent surfactant in it for that purpose. And the reason for that is I don't want to slow the gut down, right? Because fat digestion in the gut of a pigeon occurs between the gizzard and the duodenum. The duodenum is the top part of the intestine. So what happens, the fat in the safflower seed gets crushed up in the gizzard. The fat then goes in the duodenum. It then goes back, refluxes back into the gizzard, and it goes backwards and forwards. It's a very slow process of digestion compared to, say, starch or sugar, right? So, and it's the part of the digestion that slows down the gut most of all if it's not working properly. So and that's the part that is going to slow the gut down and predispose to gut problems and things like that. So essentially, practically, what we're looking at, right, is that we've got so that's a concern about the detergent. Now, if you had too much detergent in the product, it wouldn't be good for the bird. It's true, right? But I think the details are important to understand what I've included in there and why this works. So what I'm going to do is explain why it works, right? So what we have is we've got a healthy gut, right? So remember how I use this to determine what the health of birds is. So you give the KD, then the next day if the droppings are green and mushy, right, that indicates that your birds are healthy. And why does that happen? Well, what happens is the minimum amount of detergent in there will irritate the bile duct, and so you get the green droppings. Now, if you've got mucus build up and you've got a slow gut in there, you're wanting to break down that mucus, and I do that with the cationic surfactant. And what will happen is you get a tight dropping when they've got a gut problem. And so that's why you'll see the dropping improve after you've got, say, a green large dropping. You give KD and you get a small dropping if they've got that problem. Now, it's a win-win situation because it will manage that gut health before you're getting an E. coli problem and actually manage the gut health prior to a race. So that's how it works.
Does it also? I do use KD powder regularly, but I also used it for the reasons of like obviously when you give antibiotics, respiratory antibiotics or canker medications, you tend to create things like thrush and things like that. And I was under the impression that it also helped to kill thrush and bacteria like that.
Totally right, because I've acidified it. So what we're doing to acidifying the gut, now in humans it's the reverse. In a bird, an alkaline gut is detrimental. In a human, an acid gut is detrimental. So it's in the reverse. So what we're doing is we're that's how citric acid works as well. So you get citric acid, you're taking up the pH in the gut, and that's why you get the good droppings after that. But we're talking about fine-tuning health and fitness because we're talking about manage that mucus buildup or slow down the gut or the increased pH, which is the alkalinity in the gut, before it's allowed the establishment of infection, which will impact on form and health. So it's a really fine-tuning way of doing it. So it's a win-win problem in terms of term, but I use it, and it's exactly right, because with the antibiotics, I always give it after the antibiotics to control the thrush that's coming in, for sure, because it would stop that thrush straight away, and that will then allow that gut to settle down.
And also the nutrients to be absorbed by the pigeons rather than the thrush.
Totally right, and that's what it's all about. You have to have that very clear.
I've noticed that with the KD powder, it's more blue. The border's been more blue than it normally used to. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, it's only that I wanted to put a stronger dye in there, so people know that they've got the KD in there.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
and the right dose is still like the white little level teaspoon to 1 litre.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, there's variable dose rates, right? So when I'm racing, following any medication I give it Tuesday or Wednesday. For Tuesday is usually when I give it, just to see what's going on, because if it goes on Wednesday morning, if the droppings go nice, well, then I know I need to go on the same plan next week. If it goes green, I then go natural next week, you see?
Yeah.
So we do it that way. Now, if I find that, that's the normal dose, 1 white spoon to a litre. But if I find that we've got the droppings still, they go off a little bit on the Thursday, right, I will give a quarter dose of KD then for 1 drink, just to try
on the Thursday.
Yeah, but just 1 drink. And I usually because I look at the droppings Thursday morning, not microscopically but just visually. And if they're just a little bit off because of humid weather, it's usually related to humid weather or rain, right? I'll give them a quarter dose straight. That's 1 spoon to 4 litres.
Yeah, I've given it to them Thursday for more than just the 1 drink, and it's never really had a detrimental effect on my results in any way.
No, and because I agree with you, and and you've worked out in your birds how to manage it. So each block differs, but the advantage with you, Michael, is that you've got an established family of birds, and you don't bring birds in. So you have you know how then to control the health and fitness of birds in a refined way by using these products, and that's why you're consistently good at this.
Yeah, it's just these days are just very dangerous to bring pigeons in anymore, because unfortunately we're dealing with so many more problems than we used to in the past. It seems, things just seem to, every year there's different strains of viruses, pigeons becoming more, typical pigeon problems like canker and things becoming more resistant to medications, which makes it more and more difficult to control. So trying to keep certain strains out if you can, it's definitely in your best interests, I think.
No, totally right. But the problem is that you have to have good birds to start with. So, you've got them to start with, and you can
get away with it. Yeah,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, but it is difficult. I find it. The great thing is that now I've got pigeons in a new location having problems. It's very complicated. Even for me, I look at the droppings every day microscopically, and I see changes. And the great thing is I'm learning a lot. We're still learning about this stuff, and the best way. It's not about the disease, but rather of how to manage them in the correct way. And so my focus is now on trying to up the immune response, an effective immune response in the birds by focusing on this clean gut, focusing on really those vitamins that are drained from stress, which is vitamin A, D, and E.
Can I ask a quick question regarding what I've had with my own birds, probably other years as well. Like sometimes their appetite is like through the roof. Would you consider that maybe something that wasn't quite right with them, or just the fact that
that's a really good question. So we talk about this, Ivan. I think this is really interesting, this question.
Yeah.
You there, Ivan?
Yeah.
So you can edit this and maybe just start this again from if Michael starts the question again, do you think?
No, that's all right. You can just go ahead and explain it. Yeah, no
Okay.
worries.
All right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So this is what we see, and it's quite interesting, Michael, because if I didn't have pigeons, I wouldn't know this at all, right? I had a sign in my loft at Palm Beach because you forget when I used to race there, you forget what these changes mean. I had this big line drawing: increased appetite equals chlamydia.
Okay.
Yes. So what happens, and very, very early, right? So what it is, it's just coming in, and suddenly it increase appetite. Now that can correspond to a really cold night as well. So it can correspond to cold night. It can correspond to a heavy toss. But universally, you'll see that, I think, and you'll scratch your head, won't you? Because you can't put it down to a cold night.
Well, it's difficult to cold. It's hard. It's not due to hard tossing or anything like that. I'm not one to really go too crazy with training and tossing pigeons too hard. Yeah. But it's like sometimes, like especially earlier just before racing, like that you'd almost think you're not feeding the bloody things. I've got to go in there with pats and masks because they're going to tear my, because they're so friendly as well. I've got I'm scraping the floor because I feed them on the floor so that they can all get a good feed, and so I clean the floor 3 times a day if I feed them 3 times a day, and I'll have like 20 pigeons on my head, my back, waiting for the food, and I think, what's wrong with you? And then even when I'm just walking up to the loft with a bucket, you think, God, I haven't fed these for 4 days, and I thought it's ridiculous. And if I kept feeding them, they'd probably keep eating, and it just didn't seem right. But it seems to go in stages, like come in stages. It's difficult to sometimes put your finger on. Is it the fact that they're just, maybe working a bit harder? Is it the fact? And I don't hopper feed I never hopper feed my pigeons in any way because I like to keep the control that I want on them with their habits and all the rest of it from when they're babies anyway. But at the same time, they're fed. I can see they've got a nice, comfortable crop that they haven't pigged out where they've overeaten by any means, and I know they should be comfortable with what they've got, but it's hard not to feed them more when you see them. So like I said, I sit there and I think, why are you like this? I was just curious. Would you think it was something like that you'd be very concerned about?
Yeah, it comes on really quickly, doesn't it? Right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, and so there's a few. What I've found is that, and it may, my science says chlamydia, but it may not be chlamydia, but it responds to a doxycycline type treatment, right? And so let's think about what that could be then. That could be that, and if they're feeling hungry, it may be that they're not absorbing the nutrients or the energy because of darkness, right? Yeah. And so,
I thought that, so I did give them the KD, thinking, have they got a bit of thrush and they're not that's absorbing the nutrients rather than their body absorbing the nutrients, so they still think they're hungry. Yeah. But it's hard to sort of control at times.
No, true. So what I do is there's a few approaches that I use with this because your KD is great because you do that first, then you can tick off that gut, right? I would then, I go straight to I do a trial just with Doxy or Respite or something like that, and then look at the next day. You'll find the next day, and if you mix that with, say, anti-canker like Turbosol or something like that, next day the hunger will drop. Then you can work out, well, this is right, and I've got it before it got worse, you see. But it happens really quickly.
I watched the like for the respiratory trial, like chlamydia and things like that, which are going to cause you respiratory problems. I watched the way they fly around the loft, and a lot of indicators that usually show you that you've got things like SAC or respiratory type problems, which I'm picked up over the years and well aware of, and they don't seem to be showing those sorts of symptoms.
Yeah, it could be that. I think it's probably more a gut thing, but with you, your birds are very fine tuned, right? It can also be due to worms, right? Not your birds won't have worms. Whenever I've sort of tested,
whenever I've tested droppings and things like that, I've never ever had worm eggs or worms in the 45 years I've raced, I think every time, because I quite often think that myself. I've said that myself. You bastards got worms or something, and you get them checked. And I mean, typically, if you had worms, you in the droppings you'd see worm eggs, or you would get. If you did worms, you'd see the dead worms if you did have it. And I've never. People tell me they get clumps of worms, and I'd probably be horrified if I saw it, but I've never actually seen anything like that. So I would sort of have to say, no, it wasn't that.
Yeah, me too. The other thing is coccidiosis, which may do that.
Yeah, that's the other thing I was sort of possibly sort of aiming at. And that's another question. With sulfur ABS, is that also a medication that would knock off coccidiosis?
Yeah, that's good one, and it's double-sided because it does the E. coli as well.
So
the thing is that, but with the cocci, my experience would be say you always get that dark green dropping. So
yeah, when I do check them when I check them for cocci as well. My lot seems to be pretty. I very rarely get coccidiosis problems. Generally, if I sort of hear people maybe in the room saying they've had some issues with cocci, and then I might treat for it, thinking, well, they're in the units with them. They could easily pick it up. It spreads pretty easily, so they could have easily picked it up. So I might treat for a couple of days. But as a rule, the loft's fairly resistant to cocci, even though you can get it at any stage, as you say. But yeah, it was something that I actually thought as well, the coccidiosis, and I did sort of medicate for with sulfur ABS for a couple of days, and I did see an improvement in the pigeons, admittedly, but the hunger didn't really at that time didn't go. They were still sort of showing reasonable hunger as well.
Yeah, no, true. So I think if you bring in the respiratory treatment, just see next time what happens.
Whether it changes.
Yeah. The thing is, we're trying to, if we get to the notion of how we medicate pigeons versus pet birds, right? Because if a normal veterinarian came and looked at the programs I use, they'd be sort of flabbergasted. Why are you giving
so many
for 2 days, right? Why are you doing that, right? Well, there's a lot of reasons we're doing it, because we're looking at performance. We're not looking at disease as it is in a really heavy way. We're just
more of a preventative thing too.
Well, it's preventive in a way we're getting it so early that the infection there, that we're just giving the immune system a leg up to get control of it, right? And that's how we do it. So we just bring it down, leg up, then we use other things like vitamins and that just to boost them up. It is a very refined way of doing it, and it's quite complicated.
The thing is too, like you say, with antibiotics, you're supposed to go through the course of antibiotics, but if you really sort of look at it realistically in pigeons, if you were to do a 7-day course of, say, for respiratory, then go through the 7 days and do what you're supposed to do, the problem is 2 weeks later from the stresses or picking what they pick up in units, basically you might be doing that again. So to have them so regularly on sort of 7 days of a medication, me personally, I don't think that would do all that well. I'd much prefer to manage it with the 2 days and try to keep it at home, keep it at a level that you can control and keep their performance as best you can.
It's exactly right what you're saying. The pigeons are exposed to disease every time they go in the waste basket. Yeah. The mycoplasma and all those germs are aerosol spread, right? They're flooded with that so much every week. And as you say, couple that with the stress, which is not, it's a metabolic stress. It means that the body systems are under a lot of challenge, right? Yeah. And it has to give away. What you'll see is you get the birds that you clock and first 5 birds remain healthy because they've come home in a short time. But the birds that come home late, they've done it really hard. And then they fall down with the disease from the basket, then they give it to the loft. So it's a protective device for the loft. It's very the systems that have been developed are pretty good, I think.
Yeah, very good.
Well, talking about canker medication, I've had a lot of questions asked by many fanciers that you put out the Metrosole, and now we've got something different, and they don't understand what it is.
Yeah, so Metrosole is an equivalent of flagell, liquid flagell, right? So it falls under the it's a family of medicines that cure protozoa and things like canker and other things, but they also have an antibacterial effect against what's called anaerobic bacteria or spore-forming bacteria or gas-forming bacteria. And so what happened is that I couldn't get Metrosole was my medicine of choice based on the fact that it's quite mild and its focus is on the anaerobic bacteria or the gut bacteria. And get that gut bacteria when the gut slows down a lot becomes quite stagnant and you get fermentation. That's where you get gas from the crop. And linked to that bacteria slowdown is, as we've talked about, the gut is the key to health of the other systems. When you get that gut shutting down, then you get the streptococcus and those stress, or they're called opportunistic infections, and they come in when the immune system is compromised. And chlamydia is that too, and mycoplasma. These are all opportunistic infections that they impact seriously on the performance and they the ability to birth to home safely. So Metrosole was the one I wanted mostly because it's a soft medicine. And I wasn't, and I hadn't trialed all these medicines that we use. I trial with my pigeons over a year or 2 years of racing, so I know that they're perfectly safe for performance as well. So last year, because I knew I would run out of Metrosole, so I started using DiMetrosole and see what effect it has. Now it's much stronger, so it's more effective against canker than the Metrosole, and equally effective for the gas-forming bacteria. For example, what happened at my loft is during the week I had cats come around the loft, and the birds wouldn't come in. They balked at the landing board. I didn't know what was going on. I thought maybe, I don't know why they're doing this. Obviously, their brains are affected somehow. And I thought, maybe, because I was giving him DiMetrosole, maybe the DiMetrosole I gave was at a higher dose rate. And then suddenly they slept out for 2 nights in the tree, right? And I went down there one night and I saw the cats. So they all came together then. So when I managed the cats and then yesterday I put them through a trial again of because from that episode being out, they got a really nasty staph from the opportunistic infection because it was raining when they were out in cold. And so I gave the DiMetrosole and the Moxie tea this morning, and I went over this afternoon, and you wouldn't. And what they were showing prior to that is a very rough neck, lackluster, really no noise in the loft because of the consequence of being out 2 nights. They'd lost all their vitality, but by this afternoon they were back to normal again. So that's how. They were jumping, they were on edge and shaking again. So
that's great.
And so I was really pleased with that. And it's just because I was a bit worried that maybe it was making the brains a bit silly, right? But it wasn't. And I let them out to summer, and they came in straight away, no problems at all. So
does that have the same similar the active ingredients in Metrosole?
Yeah.
Does that differ greatly from say Emtrol?
No. It's very similar to Emtrol, right? So Emtrol will have the same effect, right? But
the only reason I was asking is because with Emtrol, as you know, like the active ingredients now up to 40%, and like in the past, everyone's probably at some stage in their pigeon life overdosed pigeons on Emtrol in the side effects of that. So, but one thing I've noticed over the last few years, with especially since it's got up to the sort of 40% active ingredient in Emtrol for the active ingredient, I noticed that when they're sort of on Emtrol for the couple of days that you might have them on it, it seems to knock them around far more than say the Metrosole does. On the fact that you say it's softer. medication, you'd have to agree 100% because you can see that, like I see it with my own birds as far as when I do have them on Emtrol. I just, once upon a time when turbisols worked really well and, probably the bugs weren't as resistant to it, you gave turbisol and if they had canker, you'd see once you treated them with turbisol, they'd be flapping their wings around. You'd see the difference in them, where these days I find when I've got them on things like Emtrol that, they just seem to be quiet on the perch. They almost look like they've sort of got sore guts, and then once they're off it, they sort of respond in a better way straight away. So I must probably Metrosole more these days because of that.
No, very true. The thing is that if your birds are reacting like that, bring the dose straight down because they don't have canker. Do you mean? So if you're giving that and they're reacting, it means they don't have canker. It's the same with with the other drugs. If they don't have it, they go back. So so that's what you do. But if they've got a bad bacteria in the gut, they get this massive response. So in terms of using it as a canker prevention, I'd bring the dose straight down. What dose are you using for that, Emtrol?
Well, I try to stick to the rate that they have with the Emtrol is one teaspoon to 6 litres, and try to the dose rate that they give you because I don't want to try and create resistance to it either.
I think it's 1 gram to a litre, isn't it? Which is 5 grams to 6 litres.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Something like that.
Yeah. So I agree. I'd probably go in terms of resistance. It's good what you're saying there. Your birds are showing. That means that you'd only give that medicine at the beginning of the week at that dose rate.
Yeah, I do give it very early in the week.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks, Ivan.
This is Pigeon Radio Australia, hosted on the Podbean Podcast Network and available on all podcast platforms, supporting the pigeon community worldwide. We had a few problems on the weekend with the racing, and we had to cancel a race in Birchip, and there's a lot of innuendo and rumours and all kinds of talk going around on the Facebook and social media and stuff. Do you want to make any comment about, like, I know what problems you had to try and get the birds to race, and it was just crazy. It was really crazy, and I don't think people realise what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, we were in a situation where we knew the fog was going to be bad this weekend, which we were well aware of, and unfortunately it turned out to be that way. But it's a little bit disappointing. I've been given a job to try and do the best I can for the pigeons and with the pigeons' best interests in mind. And as you know yourself, because I had to message you many times, and the truck driver and the convoy, with 100% certainty, we did everything in our power to try and get a race. And I mean, the day started terribly, where we had, our typical Birchip liberation point was all of a sudden bombarded by netballers and people rocking up. So all of a sudden we've had to find, a new place, which was the trotting track from there. And unfortunately, the fog did what it did. It stayed around. It wasn't moving anywhere. We were pretty quickly on the move. Around about 10:15, we made our move to start, that this fog wasn't going to go anywhere, and we started sort of looking to go to maybe better places, a better place where we could get, maybe the fog lifting a bit quicker and clear up for us to get a race in. And unfortunately, where did we go? We went from Birchip to Witchy Proof, where the Greater Melbourne were. We got to Witchy Proof, and the fog hadn't lifted in any way, shape, or form. It stayed there quite thick, and it wasn't going anywhere. The Greater Melbourne had moved already from there. From there, we went, I think, to Charlton. I think it was possibly Charlton from there, to see if we could, see whether the conditions improved there, which I didn't expect them to, because it's not that far from one place to the other, and the the fog was very thick there as well. But in the meantime, time's wasting. The driver needs to drive with the birds and get to these places. Time's being absorbed.
Yeah, and the birds are getting moved around, which is not very good for the birds.
Birds are getting moved around from place to place. But anyway, we went from there and we went to, I'd spoken to Mark Kavanagh regarding whether he knew anything about the VHA, where they were at this point, and they were up at Wedderburn, and he said, I said, can you find out what's happening with those guys? And Mark rang, I think he spoke to Steve Gazzola, and Steve had told him that they were fogged in there as well, and that they were going to wait it out for about an hour or so. So I got the truck driver and convoyed it to head down to Wedderburn, and it was getting to the stage where it was after lunch already, and maybe go there and see if we could sit it out a little bit. And it was getting to the time where you would think and hope that fog would start to lift and clear. So we got to Wedderburn and we sat out there for a while to see what was going to pan out. Yeah. Unbeknownst to us, then the VHA apparently had moved already, but we weren't aware of that at that stage. But after a little while, we could see that the fog was definitely not lifting. So I spoke to John Saggers at one stage and told him what was going on, and said to him, look, we're going to have to start moving forward to see if we can maybe come to clearer weather and maybe see what we can do. But as I'm saying, time's disappearing on us as well.
Away,
the birds are constantly on the move as well. You're dealing with places where you've got to find places where to take a semi-trailer loaded with pigeons and all the rest of it, be able to liberate and everything. So, we're still dealing with quite thick fog at that stage and heavy 100% cloud cover. We've then gone, left Wedderburn. I think the next place was Inglewood. We went through to try and see if it improved there. There was no great improvement there. Things are starting to get desperate because you're getting the time's just disappearing and running away with you.
Yeah.
In the end, we've sorted, at the time, I put the message out that we were going to try to get to Bridgewater and get a race at the birds up at 1:30. That was our aim. That's what we wanted to do. But unfortunately, the truck driver still has to get to these places with the pigeons and everything. And we'd found him, as you know, we'd found a lot of locations for them in the different places for them to go.
But they were using them for different sports, and we couldn't really.
That's right. But in the last one, as you know, we got to Bridgewater, which is still a fair way from it. The other thing before I say that, when we stopped at Wedderburn, the reason was also is, how short do you come before people start sort of saying, well, it's more of a toss than a race, and it becomes a no race. So that's the reason we sat out in Wedderburn, because it's slightly east of St Arnaud, so we're at our first race point distance. So how much further do you come before you start saying this is, people are going to turn around and say this is a toss, not a race, So you're trying to keep all that in mind as well. But then when you've got no choice and the fog's, still not going anywhere in Wedderburn, you've got to make decisions at this time. There's a lot of, things are happening quickly, and people just don't appreciate what we're having to deal with and go through. So we've attempted to get to what was the place, Bridgewater then, and by the time we're getting to Bridgewater, the truck, I said to Bruce, what time do we sort of estimate that you would arrive there? And he was hoping to get there before 1:30, and I said to him, well, look, and the weather was was still 100% overcast, but the visibility had got better. And even at this stage, I'm already sort of thinking, this is not looking good for us. Even at 1:30, you've got 4,000 plus pigeons on the truck. I don't know of any race at any stage that we've liberated at those times safely, and you're still dealing with poor conditions as far as visibility and cloud cover. But anyway, as it turned out, he's got there at 1:33 to the football ground that we guided him to. And, he gets there and you've got a football ground full of people and people everywhere. So there's nowhere he can go in there to liberate pigeons. And now I'm in a situation, I'm doing the sums in my head as well. I've done liberation 13 years. It's not my bloody first time I've done liberation. And, I'm well aware of the situations that we're dealing with. And then I'm doing the sums in my head. I've asked the driver, what are the conditions like? He tells me it's 100% overcast. It's the visibility is better, but it's 100% overcast. Now, I know I've got 4,000 plus pigeons on the truck. Half of them are probably having their first race. I've also got a situation where it's 1:33 and I'm talking to him and the time's wasting. I've got to now find him a new place to go to in the meantime. I also asked him, is it going to take you to unstrap the birds and all the rest of it? He's telling me at least 20 minutes. Now I'm thinking to myself, well, geez, that puts us, we've got to find a place. It's already 1:35 now.
You've got to
I've got to find a place. I've got to then, he's got to unstrap the pigeons and all the rest of it. And without even a rest, I'll be lucky to get these pigeons up by 2 o'clock. And it's just ridiculous to be, I can't risk 4,000 bloody pigeons at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, possibly 2 o'clock in the afternoon to liberate. And then, as I've said, you've got 2,000, possibly more than 2,000 fresh pigeons having their first races, 100% overcast conditions, 2 organisations. I can't see how they're going to leave in 5 minutes and head straight for home. If those pigeons hang around for another half hour, you've got pigeons not leaving the race point 2:30 to get home from Bridgewater. We would have been half our pigeons out. Yeah. And unfortunately, people don't realise what we've had to go through to get to this and the decisions that are then placed upon us, and to try to keep the pigeons' safety in mind and all the rest of it. They just don't realise that the hassles we had to do all this. And then again, even like, people some people wanted to release the pigeons for a toss and all the rest of it. It's good and well to do that, and you'd like to help them out to do that. But again, Ravenswood was suggested as a toss. That's still 130 or whatever it is, 140 kilometres away from home. With maybe time you get there with 2 hours of daylight to get pigeons home. That's just ludicrous in my eyes. So you're running out of options. Okay, then you think, maybe Kyneton. Well, where is he going to go with a semi-trailer? We're going to go to the football ground where we go and toss our pigeons with utes. You can't get a semi-trailer in there and backing it in and letting 4,000 plus pigeons go. No. It's just people don't understand the headaches that are involved with that. And don't appreciate it. It's pretty disappointing then. You're trying to do everything right. I would have loved to have had a race myself. It didn't do me. I wasn't trying to do it for myself. I can assure you. But I also understand that, it's a long race season. To throw away 1,000 plus pigeons if they don't get home because you put them up in conditions and circumstances that you shouldn't be doing. I've been racing 45 years. I can never once remember that we've liberated pigeons after 2 o'clock in the afternoon from a race. To me, I've got the pigeon's best interest at heart, and that's what I have to have at heart.
That's what it is. But I'm just rather upset at some of these people that run some of these social media groups on Facebook.
Ivan, unfortunately, you can't stop that. I'm not concerned about that. That is what it is. You're never going to stop that, but I just want people to understand, they don't always know the circumstances that we're faced with and the decisions that we have to make on the run. Time's wasting. You've got people trying to ring you. You're trying to organise and getting things done, and people are constantly ringing to see which I understand, frustration. You want to know what's going on. Yeah. But there you go. I put a message out to say that we would get up at Bridgewater at 1:30. It didn't pan out. That only creates more probably anger and frustration. Oh shit! They said they were going to do this, and it doesn't happen. But you're not realising the circumstances that we face.
And then we do have other organisations on the truck, and some of those organisations didn't want their birds let go at that late in the afternoon. Even unfortunately, it wasn't so much. The union wanted a toss and all the rest of it, but look. I look at it also this way. All right, if I could have, I would have loved to accommodate you there. But
looking at it like I've had a bit of time to think about it as well. We let the union birds go from, the fed rooms, and they got home safely. Most of them that I know about got good returns on the night, and the birds. So they had the option then to rest those birds overnight and take them for 120k, toss themselves in the morning on a sunny morning, other than me letting them go somewhere, trying to find somewhere where I can put a semi-trailer and let pigeons go, giving them maybe 2 hours to get home if they're lucky, with everything going right for them. It doesn't make common sense either when you think about it. So,
well, the other thing that was said was that we didn't have a race, or we didn't have a toss, or we didn't have a holdover in Birchip, which some people suggested, which is I find quite amusing. But they were saying that we didn't have food on the truck, which is absolutely
no. We
rubbish.
had food. We had food on the truck, and we had food and water on the truck. Unfortunately, what the problem was is that Sunday was going to be no better than it was Saturday. As far as fog goes. I've got, like I said, I have to have the pigeons' best interests at heart. I try to do the right thing by the members, but you can't please half of them, let alone all of them.
No, I know
what I mean?
Yeah.
So we had no choice to do, at the end of the day, no choice to do what we had to do.
You know what? Some of the comments and messages that people sending to even the Facebook WPF page are disgusting, and people should really think about what they're doing before they do something, I reckon.
Well, look, at the end of the day, it's not an easy job. I've got no worries. I actually feel the minute thinking about having to let those birds go even after 1:30, I was so on edge thinking this is not the right thing to do. And then when we got there, and it's, like I said, 1:33, and then the paddock's full of people and footballers and all the rest of it. Now I know I'm still half an hour from getting these pigeons up. I was literally feeling sick. And when I just said, no, this is not going to work, and I'm not sacrificing these pigeons, the relief I felt. Now, I've been racing 45 years. I know what's right and I know what's wrong. And the relief I felt after saying to myself, no, this is ridiculous. I can't do this to these pigeons. I felt a sense of relief. I know I'm going to get black. So I've done it 13 years. You never get the pats on the backs for the 95% of the time you get it right.
Yeah.
The 5% you get it wrong, everybody wants to dig the boots in. Well, I'll accept that, no problem. And if they want to continue, that's fine by me.
Well, in my opinion, I think you've done the right thing, and you had the welfare of the pigeons first.
Whether they think it's the right thing or not, for me, I know I did the right thing as far as I'm concerned. I've also, I would like to have had my pigeons in my backyard on Saturday night, but I've also got people that have to get their birds to Lara, Bacchus Marsh, things like that. They're going to be mixing with all these pigeons, getting pulled this way, that way at that time of the night. Pigeons aren't going to get home, so I've got to make that decision and do the right thing there by everyone as well.
Yeah.
So, look, people just don't understand what we have to go through at times.
They don't. I know what you had to go through because I was helping you out a few times.
Well, that's what I mean. And the truck driver can verify this. The convoy can verify this. We did everything in our power to try and get a race and do it safe in a safe manner, and it just did not pan out that way for us. And like I said, I'm not sorry for bringing those birds back because I know the majority of those birds have got home today. There's another 16 odd plus races to go. It's not our last race of the year where you didn't get a race. You've got a whole race season ahead of us, and the pigeons have to come first at the end of the day. I'm not a soft person when it comes to liberating. I've put pigeons up in some tough conditions. Don't get me wrong, but we know giving them every chance to get home is just the conditions were tough. This wasn't going to be good for the pigeons. Letting 4,000 plus pigeons after 2 o'clock from Bridgewater with 100% overcast skies. I don't know how anybody can say that's not going to be a recipe for disaster.
That's where
I'll stand by that, Ivan. It doesn't really matter.
Good on you, Michael, and I'm glad that you've got the pigeons' interest at heart as well, because we have to show responsibility as well. In actual fact, it wasn't all bad comments. I got comments from, you wouldn't believe it, Non-Pigeon Flyer made a comment there that they're glad that we had the interest and the welfare of the pigeons in our hearts.
Like I said, to me, if you do that job, you've got to have that in mind for many reasons. So I saw a clip a little while ago someone sent, I think Mark Tung had sent it to me, where it might have been in England, I think, where a guy was fishing on a boat and
I've seen that one. Yeah,
two pigeons, one landed in the water, the other one landed on his boat, the other one then flew out of the water and landed on the boat, and the weather out there was just atrocious. And these two poor pigeons sat on this boat, and he's trying to give them orange juice because he didn't have anything else, and the poor things were shaking their heads because they drinking it because they were thirsty and all the rest of it. And then he shows you again with him driving back to land with these two poor pigeons on the front of the boat. Now, things like that have a big effect on me. People have to realise that they're only flesh and blood, and they deserve all the respect that we should be giving them, to give them every opportunity to get home. So once again, kick me in the arse all you like. I've got no problems with that. But my respect is for the pigeons and welfare of those pigeons. And at the end of the day, if somebody thinks they can do a better job, please step up. I've got no problems with that.
All right, Michael. On that note, thanks very much for your time
No
today,
worries,
and we'll catch up again probably next month.
No worries, mate.
All
Thank
right,
you.
Thanks, mate.
So, stop the pigeon, stop the pigeon, stop the pigeon, stop the pigeon, stop the pigeon.